The 2021 NBA playoffs were fantastic for a variety of reasons when that was not necessarily the expectation. And as not fun as it is to admit, injuries were a big factor in that, not for wanting to see players get hurt, but rather taking some of the more major pieces off of the board. And I am of course mostly referencing the Brooklyn Nets with that statement, the team that was expected to sweep the postseason before injury derailed it. Kyrie went down, which, let's be honest, sadly is not a surprise, but even the Iron Man himself, James Harden, ended up dealing with a major injury, which sidelined him for multiple games and made him play very poorly in the games that he did play. The biggest what if of this postseason was, what if the Nets were healthy? And I think most of us know that the answer to that what if is they would have won it all. And being that the Nets are relatively healthy going into the regular season, and assuming that that holds up in the postseason, can anybody beat the Brooklyn Nets? Let's talk about it. I'm skipping the subscribe promotion thing. Listen to me real quick. I need to mention that the most recent upload on this channel, the first episode of my NBA series for the Dallas Mavericks for 2K22, I would appreciate it if you went and checked that out. It is a scripted, realistic series where I look at the details of building a team. I actually started YouTube initially to do stuff like this back in 2017, and then I obviously went in a different direction, but it's still something that I really enjoy doing, so please go watch episode 1 and go subscribe to my 2K channel where episode 2 and the rest of the series will be hosted. Even if you do not enjoy 2K content, I think I do these videos in a way where it can be enjoyable from a basketball standpoint before from a 2K standpoint. So please go check that out. I'm really passionate about them, and I kind of botched the release of it because I had to re-upload them because I fucked up the audio. But yeah, go check them out. Much appreciated. With that out of the way, let's talk about the Nets. I think the best way to go about looking at how someone could beat the Nets is by looking at the biggest criticisms of them last year. And no, I don't mean the, it's so unfair or the ring doesn't count criticisms, none of the stupid narrative shit. I mean like actual basketball on the court criticism. One of the biggest factors for the Nets going into next season is that health permitted, we'll actually see the big three play together an actual sizable amount of time. In the regular season, KD, Kyrie, and Harden actually barely played together as a trio. It was usually one or two of them in some combination or another. And as a result, the Nets team that you got on any given night was really dependent on who was hurt or not, and the style of play and all of that was contingent on it. The three-headed monster of Kyrie, Harden, and Durant only played 8 games in total in the regular season, and of course 5 in the postseason versus the Celtics. The only thing you could say to question how good Brooklyn would be was a lack of chemistry between the big three. 8 regular season games and 5 postseason games is like a nothing sample size. Even if you do have an incredible roster, fit matters, system matters, understanding that system, the pieces, how they fall into place, all that stuff is important. And while the there's only one ball argument is very rarely actually like a thing, like very rarely does it actually end up being a factor as much as that criticism is levied against multiple duos and trios. Being that they only played 8 games, I don't know why that criticism was seen as outright stupid after a certain period of time when it wasn't considered stupid before the trade actually happened. Like, I don't know why 8 regular season games and 5 postseason games is like, that's all the evidence we need that there will not be a single chemistry issue among these 3 players. I don't think it's going to be a problem like at all, as I initially did when the idea of Harden being on the Nets was just the idea of it. But I also don't think it's just completely out of the realm of possibility. And that also doesn't have to stem from selfishness or anything. I think it's where the defensiveness of that argument comes from, particularly with Harden fans. I think Harden more than proved with his time on the Nets that he is willing to shoot less and be more focused on facilitating. But just the fact that these guys aren't used to playing with this much talent, because again, they only played 8 regular season games together, like Harden and KD have literally played in more all-star games than the 3 have played together in the regular season, there can be some stepping on toes just by the fact that they haven't played together much. That was something that could have potentially derailed them. Even then, that was absolutely grasping at straws because that's really all you can do with a team this good. But that was something you could say, but major emphasis on could. After a full, healthy regular season, Any awkwardness that could have reared its head with this team in the 2021 playoffs could have been problematic, but it's certainly going to be gone for 2022 because unless, of course, injury ends up being a big factor in the regular season, they will figure that out throughout a full regular season. I guess another thing you could criticize is like depth, but honestly, put me out at center and they probably still win. That's how good that trio is. I have been of the opinion for a really long time now that depth is overrated. Rarely is depth the second or third or even fourth reason why a championship team ends up being a championship team. Jesus Christ. Especially considering how tight rotations get in the playoffs. If you have 3 crazy good players, all you really need is a few solid role players, and Joe Harris, Patty Mills, Blake Griffin, Bruce Brown, Paul Millsap, and Nick Claxton are all solid, if not more. And last season, just Joe Harris, Jeff Green, Blake Griffin, Bruce Brown, and Claxton was also good. So that, to me, isn't actually important. Depth will not be why they fail. The other criticism was really more so just a litmus test for whether or not you were actually paying attention, and that is defense. Initially, the team's defense was suspect, but as the season progressed, they got to middle of the pack defensively, and in the playoffs, granted there were injuries, of course, the Nets were 3rd in defensive rating, and even if they're like the 20th best defense in the league, the task of outscoring the Nets is so daunting regardless of their defensive ability. So the one ball thing, if that was to be a thing, which I'm really not even sure that it would be, and I'd probably say no, if it would be, it'll be gone by the time the postseason comes around. Depth is A, not as important as it should be, and B, I'd probably argue that the Nets have good depth, if anything. And the defensive argument falls short, not because their defense is great, but because it's good enough considering how much offensive firepower they have. So at that point, how do you beat them? Where is the weakness that you can exploit? The only thing the Nets have is overwhelming strengths, scoring, shooting, playmaking, star power, and things that aren't overwhelming strengths, but aren't really flaws either: depth, defense, and maybe chemistry. Looking among the best teams in the league, the Lakers definitely have the most star power that can combat the Nets. Who is the best player in that series is entirely up for debate, but regardless, I don't think the difference between LeBron or whoever the Nets' best player is ain't much, and Harden or KD are definitely better than the second best player, Anthony Davis, and I don't think anyone outside of irrational Russ fans would really argue that he's better than Kyrie Irving. So the Nets would win the star power thing there, even though it's the closest among all the teams in the league. Then shooting, like, don't make me laugh. Playmaking actually goes to LA because LeBron and Russ is one of the best playmaking duos ever. And of course, the defense goes to LA because AD can pretty much single-handedly make a better defense than the Nets can. But even then, depth probably goes Brooklyn's way. I don't think the Lakers topple the Nets, even though they might have the best chance. Should we expect a Bucks repeat next year if the Nets are healthy? Because I don't think so. While I do think the Bucks with Giannis at center have easily the best defensive matchup versus the Nets, and of course Giannis can get in the paint fairly easily versus them as well, I don't think the defense can slow the outpour of scoring from the 3 of them, not to mention how inconsistent Giannis's help can be. The biggest story with the Bucks in the postseason was how wishy-washy they could be. I literally started calling them bipolar in my post-game recaps. And you can't bring this shit versus that team. You gotta bring your A game every single night, and to put it simply, you cannot rely on this Bucks team as a whole to bring their A game every night, even if they did just win a championship. And then after the Lakers and Bucks, there's like a notable drop-off other than like, I guess, the Clippers. But the problem with them is Kawhi's injury, though in a matchup with the Nets, they'd obviously be facing them in the finals, so by then, sure. But I don't think chemistry-wise, getting Kawhi right before the playoffs as he's projected to get there could get this team that far. So that takes the Clippers off of the table. If they were healthy, I'd entertain that matchup, but I seriously doubt the Clippers make the finals, with Kawhi missing 90% of the regular season, if not more. The Nuggets have a crazy good offense with a healthy Jamal Murray, but obviously it's not more firepower than the Nets' big 3, and as good defensively as Aaron Gordon is, he is not good enough to be the only great defender in the starting lineup of a team that beats the Nets. The Heat have the next best defensive matchup after the Bucks, but even with the addition of Kyle Lowry, I don't trust their offense to be good enough to beat the Nets. After that, it's like, what? The Sixers, the Warriors, the Jazz, the Celtics? Let's not kid ourselves. If Brooklyn is healthy, they beat every other team in the league. Now, I won't say that with outright certainty because as cheesy as it is, Kevin Garnett was right when he said anything is possible. But if I was a betting man and I had to put all my money on one team winning a championship, knowing that every team is going to be healthy in the postseason, I am putting all of that money on the Brooklyn Nets. Nobody individually, I believe, is good enough to beat this team in a 7-game series. The only thing that's going to beat them is injury. Again, please go check out that Mavs My NBA series. Go subscribe to my 2K channel, but obviously watch episode 1 first before you watch episode 2. Episode 3 will hopefully be out the day after this video goes up. So yeah, or it might be out by now. It depends how quickly Rudy gets this back to me. Speaking of that, shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but at the end of this video, please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.